Hey everyone, welcome back to another tutorial. My name's Jake, and I'm going to be walking you through doing some building explosion effects with some really cool assets from ProductionCrate. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at what we're going to be creating.
Man, this is Unit 12. I'm on site prepping canisters for extermination of Category 3 mega roaches. Category 9. Copy that. I love a Category 9.
Pretty cool, lots of fun stuff in there. Everything from transforming CG weaponry to big explosions, and we'll mainly be looking at today the hero building explosion effect, where the rocket hits it and it all comes tumbling down, and how we can combine multiple pieces of stock assets together to create a convincing effect. So let's go ahead and jump right in. All right, so here we are in Adobe After Effects. As you can see, I already have my footage imported. So we're gonna drag this down here to this icon to create a new composition. And here's our actor John stumbling back and staring at the sky where the buildings are gonna be. And just from looking at this, I know the first thing we're gonna wanna do is track it, considering this is a handheld movement, and so it does shift around just a little bit as we scrub through. Now, before we get too far into this, I wanna warn you guys, I am using a free plugin from Video Copilot called FX Console, which allows me to hit Control Space whenever I have a layer selected, and then just type in whatever I want to search for in the effects menu here. Now, if you don't want to go grab Effects Console, you can find the same effects that I search for here over in the Effects and Presets panel, or just by coming up here to the top where the effects dropdown is, and it has everything here as well. But again, since I'm using Effects Console, I'll just select my footage, hit Control Space, and then I'll type in Mocha. I'm gonna select Mocha AE, which comes free with After Effects 2025, and then we'll go ahead and click this Launch Mocha AE button. Now here we are in Mocha, we can click Close, go ahead and click Start. The playhead is down here at the bottom, and if we scrub through, we're just gonna look for a place in this footage that has high contrast and stays in frame the full time. I think I'm gonna grab the corner of this building here. So let's come up here to the X spline tool, select this, and then we're gonna draw just a little box around the corner. And when you're done drawing, you can right click to stop adding new points. And then we're gonna click this button on the left to analyze forward. Now, once that's finished analyzing, we can click the X in the top right corner and then press save. Now back in After Effects, in the Effects Controls panel, there is a drop down for the tracking data. So we're gonna click that and then click this big button that says Create Track Data. Once you see all these keyframes appear, you know it worked. And we're gonna change the export option from corner pin to transform. Now it's asking us where we're going to export this tracking data, which at the moment we don't have anything in our composition to export it to. So what we're gonna do is create a new null object by coming up to Layer, New, Null Object. Now select your footage, change the layer export to your null, and then click Apply Export. Now, if you select your null, zoom in here a little bit, you can see there's a bunch of keyframes and it sticks to the corner of that building. So we should be all good to start working on our effect now that we have this tracked. Here on the ProductionCrate website, there's a lot of really cool new building explosion assets that we can hover over and preview. And in the original effect, I did have this one heroed in the middle because it explodes from the center and I wanted the rocket to hit there. And then I had two additional ones to explode to the left and then one over to the right. So grab a couple of these, whichever suits you, and let's bring them over into After Effects. Back in After Effects, we can go to the project panel, and then up here in the top left, we can go to File, Import File. Now I went ahead and downloaded the 3 main building explosions that I wanted, as well as this background image, which is also able to be found on ProductionCrate. So I'm gonna select all 4 of these and hit import. And just because I like to keep my projects a little bit more organized, I'm gonna grab all 4 of these and drag them into a new folder. And I'm just gonna call this assets. Now, if we bring out our hero building, and place it roughly where we want it, maybe scale it up just a little and scrub through our footage. It's obviously just gonna be floating there until we grab this pick whip and drag it to the null. And if we scrub through now, we can see it's sticking to the sky much more. But now that we've got this locked to our footage, we see the first problem that we're going to need to solve, which is that John and this foreground building actually need to be in front of this stock layer. So in order to do that, we're gonna have to chop them out from the sky, and there's a few techniques we're gonna use in order to get us there. So let's go ahead and hide our building layer for now, select our footage and duplicate it, and then let's solo the duplicate just so we can isolate that while we're working. Now, just from looking at this, I can see that the sky is definitely way brighter than the rest of the footage, so I may be able to get away with partially using the sky as a luma matte. So in order to do that, I'm gonna click this layer, hit Control Space to bring up Effects Console, and we're gonna use the Colorama effect. Now, just to be tidy, we can go ahead and delete Mocha off of this duplicate layer, and we're gonna drop down the output cycle and change the preset from none to ramp gray. Now, this little wheel just allows us to clamp specific values. So in order to do that, I'm gonna select somewhere here in the gray area and create a new perfect white. Make sure that this is set to 100% brightness. Now we're gonna select somewhere in here and create a new perfect black. Again, make sure that this is set to 0 and click OK. And you can already see what this is doing. We almost have a perfect white outline where the sky is and a black outline where the foreground layers should be. There's a couple areas I know we're gonna have to clean up initially, such as the choke on the hair, the jacket's too bright, and we do have some highlights on this building that we're not gonna be able to get rid of with this effect, but this is a really good start. But rather than playing with these two sliders while we're staring at it in black and white, what I like to do is select the stock footage that I know is gonna be behind these layers, and then grab the track matte pick whip and select the building explosion layer that we're currently working on. Now by default, it's using the alpha matte, but I actually want to press this button to change it to a luma matte, and then don't forget to turn the layer back on. You can already see it's doing its job pretty well, except if we zoom in here, it's definitely a little bit visible in places it shouldn't be, particularly the jacket of our actor. So what we're gonna do in order to fix that is pre-compose our duplicate layer by selecting it and hitting Control-Shift-C, and then make sure you click this button that says Move All Attributes to a new composition, and I'm gonna call this Sky Matte. All right, now we can go ahead and double click on this Sky Matte comp. Now here in this pre-composition is where we'll make our changes to this black and white matte. So the first thing I know we wanna take care of is this light color on his jacket, because we want this to be as close to perfectly black as possible in order to block out that building. So click your footage, hit Control-D on the keyboard to duplicate it, go to the Effects controls, and let's delete Colorama. Now fortunately, this character is wearing a green colored jacket, so I know we're gonna be able to use maybe some sort of chroma key process in order to turn this into a matte to add back on to our original, which is below. So let's hit Control-Space to bring up Effects Console and type in Key Light. We're gonna grab this screen color picker and grab one of the areas on his jacket that's pretty neutral right in the middle, and then change Final Result to Combined Matte. Now, if we change the blending mode of this layer from normal to multiply, you can see if we toggle this on and off that we've pretty much taken care of that problem. We can play with the screen gain and balance in order to make this as dark as possible, but this is already pretty close to where we need it to be. Now, the next thing I want to do is add a black solid to cover up some of the highlights on these buildings. However, since this is a moving shot, if you remember, we need that black solid to be tracked to our original null. So let's jump back over into our main composition, click your null, hit Control-C to copy, go back to Sky Matte, Control-V to paste. Now let's create a new solid. You can come up here to Layer and find New Solid up here, or memorize that shortcut Control-Y to speed up your workflow, and change this to black, click OK. Now, just to make sure it doesn't go off the edges, I am gonna scale this up a little bit and then parent it to our null using that pick whip from earlier. Now, if we temporarily hide this, we can grab our mask tool and zoom in to draw a rough mask around the areas that we know need to stay perfectly black. So I'm just gonna make sure to get the top of that building, maybe come across here. I am going a little bit quick just for the sake of the tutorial, but since this is tracked, we can get as close to the edge of this building as you'd like. So come around the bottom and close off that mask and turn back on that black solid to cover up that area. And it's looking pretty good so far. There's two more things I want to do in here just to correct this matte. The first is to get this pixel clouding out of the sky, and we'll just do the same thing we did with the black solid, except this time, let's make it white. So again, Control Y on the keyboard brings up the create solid, make it white and click OK. Parent it to the null, hide it, grab your pen tool, let's draw a little shape around the area we want perfectly white, close off that mask, and turn back on that layer. Now the last thing I want to do in this composition is soften these leaves. Since these are crunched so hard with the colorama effect, anything we put behind them is going to look a little too sharp, and we want a little bit of gray value in these leaves. So in order to do that, what I'm actually going to do is grab this bottom footage layer with colorama on it, duplicate it, and let's solo it for now. Open back up the output cycle so we can see this wheel, and let's play with this a little bit to soften back out that tree. That's looking pretty good since we're getting all these small leaves coming back in. Now we don't want this affecting the whole sky, just this section where the tree is at. But if we tried to mask it, we'd have a couple different problems. The first of which is that regardless of if we feather this mask or not, the colorama effect is crunching that mask and it's not giving us a good feather. So we're not going to do it that way. Instead, we're going to create another new solid, make it black, click OK. Again, let's scale it up just a little bit, parent it to the null, go ahead and hide it for now, and then draw on this mask, again, make sure this black solid is selected, a little shape around the outside of this tree and these bushes down here. Now what we can do is grab our copy we made earlier, the one that's soloed, and use this track map pick whip and select the black solid. So that way, if we click our black solid and hit F on the keyboard and start adding a feather, it does react the way we want it to. So we can unsolo that, and we pretty much have a finished matte that's ready to use. All right, now back in our main composition, let's go ahead and start tweaking our buildings. The first thing I want to do is slide this over so that way the explosion starts not at the beginning, but instead roughly right when the rocket would impact. So I think around here looks pretty good. Scale this down, maybe push it right about there. And you'll see obviously if we scrub backwards, the building just disappears. So in order to bring that to our start, let's right click, go to time, and choose time remapping, and we can just drag this back out to the beginning. I'm gonna rotate this also just a little bit to match our skyline. And now let's take care of the color, because obviously this isn't matching our scene very well at the moment. So let's add a levels adjustment to the building. And one thing I like to do is cycle between the red, green, and blue channels while adjusting the red, green, and blue on the levels accordingly to match the sky. So let's go to the red channel, go to the red channel on the levels, and let's start dragging up this slider till it looks about how we want it to. Go to the green, do the same, and lastly the blue. And now let's switch it back over to RGB, and it's looking pretty good. If you notice one of the colors is a little too dominant, say you went a little heavy on the green and your building ends up looking like that, you can just go to the specific channel that you notice the color is too dominant and just play with that slider until you get it to match just a little bit better. Now I also went ahead and downloaded this London city skyline from ProductionCrate to fill out the background of our scene. So here in the project panel, I already have that imported. Let's drag it below our building explosion and then use the track matte to pick our sky matte, and don't forget to change it to Luma matte. Now next, let's parent it to the null with the pick whip, scale it and place it where it needs to be to roughly fill out the background. And again, we'll add that levels adjustment and go through the same process. And since this is a little further away, I'm also gonna add a small box blur onto this as well, maybe around 2 pixels. And now let's go ahead and bring in our other 2 building explosion assets. I have this one here, which blows to the right, and also this one, which blows to the left. When I'm creating the shot, what I'm thinking about is the shockwave exploding outward and affecting the buildings around it, just to give it a little more visual interest than if it were a single tall building, and also help fill out the scene just that much more. So let's drag in our next building above the sky matte painting, but below our main building explosion. And we're going through the exact same process as before. Pick whip the sky matte, change it to Luma matte, pick whip the null, put it in place, slide it over so that way the explosions are timed up together, and then adding our levels adjustment and tweaking the color the same way as before. Now, just as before, don't forget to enable time remapping on this layer and drag it back to the beginning of the clip so that way it doesn't just disappear. Now we can go ahead and do our next building, and I'm just gonna skip through this since all of the steps are exactly the same. All right, and there we go. We have our 3 main buildings in. So let's go ahead and add in some additional detail, including a really cool shockwave, and then we'll polish this up with some cool finishing effects and finally some color. Now for the main part of the shockwave, I went ahead and downloaded this World Breaker Shockwave 8 from ProductionCrate, and I imported it into my After Effects project. So let's drag that out into our main composition and let's put it above all of our buildings. Now, similar to our buildings, we are going to go ahead and use the sky matte so that way it appears behind all of our foreground layers. So change that to Lumimat after adding it, and then also pick whip it to our null. Now let's go to the moment where the rocket would hit the building right about here and drag the beginning of the shockwave over to its brightest point and trim off the beginning. Now let's scale and position that into place and change the blending mode to add. Now the shockwave is expanding a little too slow, but the cool animated noise is already moving pretty quick. So instead of speeding up this clip, let's add a scale animation by hitting S on the keyboard and clicking the stopwatch to create a keyframe. Let's move forward in the timeline, maybe 20-30 frames, and scale it all the way up and almost out of frame. Maybe we'll have it go just a little bit quicker. And now that I'm looking at this, I think it would be cool if these side buildings exploded as soon as the shockwave was about to make impact. So let's go ahead and grab both of those and slide them over just a couple frames. That's looking pretty cool, except the shockwave is a little bit too bright. So let's hit T on the keyboard and let's lower the opacity some, maybe around 20 or 30%. And I'm also gonna have this fade out as it hits the edges of the frame. So maybe let's create a keyframe right in the middle, go forward a few frames until it's barely visible anymore, and then just drop the opacity to 0. ProductionCrate also has these really cool aerial explosions. So I went ahead and downloaded Ultimate Explosion 5 Aerial, and we're gonna add that into our scene now. Now I've got that imported into my After Effects project. I'll drag that out above everything we've done so far. And same as before, let's use our sky matte and our null. Now let's just slide this over so the explosion lines up appropriately. And I'm also gonna cut off just the first few frames of this, put it into place, and that's looking pretty cool. But obviously, same as our buildings before, this is a little bit too dark. So let's add a levels adjustment and go through a similar process as we've done with the buildings, changing between the red, green, and blue channels. That's looking pretty cool. Now, my first complaint from looking at this is that the explosion definitely appears to be sitting on top of the building, and I want to be able to see some different pieces of this debris and the building itself poking through the explosion. So in order to do that, I'm going to grab our main building, duplicate it with Control D on the keyboard, and bring it back up to the top. Now let's grab our pen tool and mask some of the areas that are coming towards us. You can hit F on the keyboard and let's increase the feather just a bit. And this is already integrated pretty well. However, what I might do is hit M on the keyboard with our top building layer selected and create a keyframe for the mask path, and then go to the end of our composition and let's just adjust it so that way the smoke appears to be coming towards us and engulfing more of the building as it begins to tumble. Now let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the rocket that we see in the original shot. For that short, I did end up simulating the smoke custom inside of Cinema 4D and attaching it to this really cool missile model from RenderCrate. On the ProductionCrate website, there's a whole catalog of 3D models, and there's honestly some really cool stuff in here. So if you're into 3D, make sure you go check out what's here. I utilized a bunch of these cool little weapons and sci-fi objects in order to kit bash together the big transforming sci-fi weapon that you saw in that original short. Now, the smoke trail and the missile that were rendered out of Cinema 4D are able to be added to our shot the exact same way as the buildings, by dragging it in, adding it to the sky matte, parenting it to the null, and then scaling and positioning it into place. If you don't have access to simulating something custom, there are a handful of good options on the ProductionCrate website, particularly these meteor across sky trails that you could track, scale, and position into place to simulate that rocket trail going across the sky. And just to sweeten up that original rocket takeoff, I did add an aerial smoke burst, also able to be found on ProductionCrate. But enough about this smoke trail for now. Let's go ahead and talk about the finishing steps we can do to make this shot a lot more dynamic and exciting. So let's go ahead and grab our main composition from the project panel and drag it down here to bring it into a fresh composition, which I'll right click, go to comp settings, and rename to finishing effects. Now here in this comp is where we're going to add our glow, our camera shake, as well as a few impact frames to make this have a little bit more pop. So let's go ahead and take care of those impact frames first. I'm gonna drag my playhead to the moment that the rocket impacts, right about here, and hit Control D to duplicate our footage. And then we can also drag this in so it starts on this particular frame, or you can use the shortcut Alt open bracket to do the very same thing. Next, I'm going to be using a plugin from the ProductionCrate LaForge suite called Easy Glow. So once you have that installed, you'll be able to find Easy Glow in the search. Now in the effects panel, change the glow tint to something in the orange color range, nothing too saturated, maybe around here. And then let's increase the tint strength. Next, I'm going to hit Control Y on the keyboard to create a new solid. Again, let's make something that's kind of light orange. Press OK. We can hide it for now, and then let's grab our circle mask tool. If at the top you don't see the circle, you can access it by clicking and holding on the rectangle mask tool to reveal all the options. So select ellipse, and then hold Control and click and drag in the center of where the explosion is, and create a circle probably about this big. Now we can turn back on this orange solid, and let's toggle these switches to change the blending mode to Add. Now hit F to reveal the feather properties of your mask, and let's increase this a whole bunch. Now, same as our footage duplicate, we want this orange solid to start on this particular frame. So make sure it's selected, and you can hit Alt open bracket to bring it forward to where the playhead is. Now, I want this first impact frame to be pretty much completely blown out. I don't want to see even close to as much footage as we're seeing right here. So select your solid, hit MM on the keyboard to reveal the mask properties, and let's expand this mask. Somewhere about there feels good. Now create a keyframe on this frame for the mask expansion, and let's move forward one frame and decrease it probably about there. Now for the next couple impact frames, I want it to feel as if the camera's exposure has automatically adjusted to compensate for this bright explosion. So let's make sure this solid and this first footage duplicate end on this frame. So select them both, and you can hit Alt end bracket to bring them in towards the playhead. Now jump forward one more frame, and we're going to select our original footage, hit Control D to create another copy, and again Alt open bracket so it starts on this particular frame. Now with your circle mask tool selected, you can hold Control, click and drag in the center, and create another circle roughly about that big around the explosion. Set this particular mask to subtract, and now let's add a levels adjustment to this top copy of the footage. I'm going to start darkening it in a ton until everything except for the sky is pretty much completely crushed to black. Now hit F on the keyboard, and let's increase the feather so we don't have just a harsh circular edge. Now next, I'm going to create a new adjustment layer, which we can do by coming up to Layer, New, Adjustment Layer, or you can memorize the shortcut Control-Alt-Y to do the same thing. Again, Alt open bracket to bring the adjustment layer to where it starts on this frame, and I'm going to add a curves adjustment. To this curves adjustment, I'm going to brighten it up some, go to the red channel and increase that, and now go to the blue channel and decrease that to create this warm glow. Now I'm also going to use another plugin from the LaForge suite called Easy God Rays. I'm going to set the center to be where the explosion is, and now we're going to go forward one more frame, select both of these new layers we created, and hit Alt, close bracket to end them. And now we've got these 4 impact frames that create a really cool effect, but as we come out of them, it feels a little underwhelming. This explosion isn't standing out in the sky as much as I'd like it to, so let's add some more glow. Now, in order to make sure that just the explosion is glowing, I'll show you a neat trick that I used on the original shot. Let's duplicate our footage at the bottom one more time. Again, Alt open bracket so it starts on this frame. And next, I'm going to add the key light effect, which is usually used for green and blue screens. Grab the color picker, and let's select one of these orange colors from the explosion. Change it from final result to combined matte, and then we're going to throw on the invert effect, so that way the explosion is white. We can ignore all of these gray values that are showing up, as those aren't going to be visible once we're finished adding this in. Now we can add another instance of ProductionCrate's Easy Glow, change the glow tint to something orange, and increase the tint strength. You're not going to see this do a whole lot as the brightest parts of the image are pretty small, but as we scrub forward, you can really see what this is doing. However, all of this glowing area is a little bit too sharp, so I am also going to throw on a fast box blur, so that way we can soften this out just a bit. Next, let's switch the blending mode from normal to add, and we can continue tweaking these settings. Maybe a little bit more blur, maybe decrease the intensity of the glow just a hair. And now let's go ahead and throw in another orange solid. It should be the same color as the previous one we created. Click OK. Let's draw a circular mask around the sky. This time set it to screen, hit F on the keyboard, and let's feather that out a whole bunch. Now obviously we don't want this solid to last for the full length of the composition, so let's drag it in so it starts at the same time as our glow layer. Now that's looking pretty cool so far, except as the explosion goes on and the smoke takes over, this is starting to look just a little too intense. So in order to fix that, what I'm going to do is go a few frames after the initial explosion starts, and let's create a keyframe for both the opacity on the orange solid and on our building glow layer. Let's jump forward to later in the explosion, and let's drop these both down to 0. That's looking pretty cool. One more thing I'm going to do inside this composition that I did in the original shot is add in a displacement map to further intensify this initial impact. So to do that, let's create a white solid, Let's put it on top of everything else. I'm gonna hide it for now so I can see the explosion, and let's draw a circular mask around it one last time. Now we can return on our solid layer, select it and hit MM on the keyboard to bring up the mask expansion properties. Now let's go to when the explosion first starts, maybe a frame before our first impact frame, and drag the mask expansion negative until the circle completely disappears. Set a keyframe. Now let's move forward till probably right around here when these secondary buildings are just about finished falling over. And let's increase the mask expansion until it completely fills the frame. Now next, I'm gonna select this mask and hit Control D to duplicate it. And then let's set the second mask from add to subtract. And also on the second mask, I'm gonna grab these two keyframes and slide them over 2 or 3 frames. So if we play this back, you can see we've created this growing ring. Now this ring is going to drive our displacement, so I don't want it to be affecting the ground as much as it currently is. However, leaving it there just a little bit is fine. So let's grab the mask pen tool and let's draw a mask around the bottom foreground layers of this footage. Just something like that should do. And let's change this to subtract. Now, if we select our solid and hit F, we'll reveal all the feather properties of our masks, and we can start softening this out. Maybe somewhere around 200 on each should do the trick. Now, last, I want to add a solid composite effect to this and change it from white to black, and then also throw on a turbulent displace. Let's increase the size of this displacement, but maybe decrease the amount just a hair. If we set this from normal to screen and then hit T on the keyboard, we can decrease the opacity so it's really low, something that's barely visible, maybe around 10 to 15%. And now that I'm looking at this, I can see it's growing just a little bit faster than our World Breaker shockwave that we added in earlier. So I'm actually gonna hit U on the keyboard to reveal the keyframes and drag these back keyframes out just a hair so we can slow this down. Now lastly, let's add a new adjustment layer. Remember that is Control-Alt-Y on the keyboard, and we're gonna add our final LaForge plugin, which is called Crate's Distortion. Now this is gonna look insane when you first add it, but I'll show you how we can adjust some of these settings to get it closer to what we want. First, in the Effects Controls panel, let's drop down Displacement Inputs and turn off Blend Iterations. Next, let's go up to Textures and change the input to our white solid that we created earlier with that circular ring on it. Now don't forget to change it from source to effects and masks, so that way it takes into account both our solid composite and our turbulent displace. Now drop down the parameters and let's decrease the strength from 35, which is default, to something really low, maybe like 1. And you can see what this is doing if I play it back. It's adding this really cool ripple that follows the ring that we created. This is maybe still just a little bit too intense right now, so maybe I'll set it to like 0.8 and decrease the X multiplier just a hair. Now let's zoom in just a little bit and start playing with these aberration sliders. As we drag this up, you can see we're starting to introduce some really nice texture. Maybe just a little bit of blue, not too much. Now, I think we can call this about good right there, except obviously we don't want this to last for the entire duration of the clip. So same as before, let's go to the very first frame where the impact starts, select our adjustment layer and hit Alt open bracket, so that way it's not rendering on the first portion of this composition. Now we can go ahead and select all of these layers and hit Control-Shift-C to pre-compose them. And I'm gonna call this comp Impact Frames. Now let's go ahead and add in our camera shake. For that, I'm gonna be using Crate's camera shake script, which you can download and throw into your After Effects support files folder under Scripts, Scripts UI Panels. Once that's there, you'll be able to find it in the window dropdown at the bottom with any other scripts you have installed. So select ProductionCrate Camera Shake, and it's gonna pop open this little handy dialog. For this particular shot, we're not going to use shake, we're gonna change it to the jolt mode. Now what jolt is going to do compared to shake is instead of adding it to the entire composition, it'll just add it for a few frames after wherever the playhead is once you hit this jolt button. So let's go to the start of our explosion, right about here, and I'm gonna increase the amplitude because I know I'm gonna want this to be a very shaky shot. And then maybe decrease the frequency so the shakes are big, but they're kind of slow. And then we can hit jolt. If you hit U on the keyboard with your layer selected, you can see the keyframes that it's added. And I honestly think that looks pretty cool. I might slow this down a little bit, which we could either do by deleting these keyframes and lowering the frequency, or I can just click and drag to select them all, hold Alt, and pull the back one out just to slow these all down. And maybe we can also hit F9, so that way all of these are smooth. That's looking pretty good to me, so we can go ahead and close out of this script dialog. Now, the last thing we can do inside of this composition is add in just a little bit of color so it doesn't feel so flat. So let's throw on a new adjustment layer, remember Control-Alt-Y, and then let's add the Lumetri color effect. Under the creative dropdown, we can select through any number of these LUTs. I like this Kodak film stock, I think that looks pretty cool. Now let's go to the basic correction dropdown and increase the contrast, maybe decrease the highlights just a touch. Let's warm up the shot by dragging the temperature to the right, and maybe we can crush the blacks just a little bit. Now I'm gonna throw on a curves adjustment, and let's add a little contrast S-curve, nothing too dramatic. Maybe we can go to the blue and add a little S-curve there as well. And then I'm also gonna punch up the green just a little because I think that looks kind of cool. And there we go, a building explosion shot. Obviously there's a handful of things we could go back and polish up, but all the basic steps are there. I hope you guys enjoyed watching. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you in the next one.